It certainly has been a while since we touched on the region of Southeast Asia, a region of many diverse climates and even more diverse people. One major organization that has been gaining increasing international notoriety is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, a group of almost all Southeast Asian countries that act in a similar manner to the European Union, another supranational organization that pushes for further integration for European countries. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there are no major political parties or movements currently pushing for complete political integration of the ASEAN nations into a single country. And this proposal isn't taken seriously by the overwhelming majority of the region's population, so this video will be more of a thought experiment, musing of what could be in the future if ASEAN proves to be a success and prompts further integration and eventual federation between all of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asian people are a combination of many different gene pools, cultures, religions, and languages that have always made it one of the most intriguing places in all of Asia, and the entire world for that matter. As we discussed a few months ago, the indigenous people of all Southeast Asian countries were the dark-skinned and curly-haired Melanesian-like peoples who lived in both mainland and maritime Southeast Asia for a few tens of thousands of years, and very little is known about their culture or religions prior to the migration of a Proto-East Asian population south from China and into this region around 10,000 years ago. There was a large-scale and gradual migration of Austronesian, Thai, and Austroasiatic peoples from the north into Southeast Asia, assimilating most of the remaining Melanesian inhabitants, leading to Southeast Asians having on average a duskier complexion than East Asians, although pockets of the full-blooded indigenous people still do remain in many regions, especially on the fringes of Southeast Asia near Oceania. Not only are Southeast Asians a combination of East Asian and ancient indigenous influences, but also contain many elements from neighboring South Asia, with Hinduism actually being the dominant religion in almost all of Southeast Asia until around a millennia ago, when Buddhism spread from the north, although Buddhism, of course, also originated in South Asia. The only pockets of indigenous Hinduism that remain are on the island of Bali in Indonesia and the small Cham minorities in Vietnam and Cambodia, although there has been a large wave of South Asian migrants to the region in recent times, especially Malaysia and Singapore. Not to mention that many of the original alphabets used in Southeast Asia are derived from the Brahmic scripts from India. Interestingly, another region that has had an especially large impact on Southeast Asia is Southwest Asia, where Arab sailors from the Hadramaut spread Islam to many parts of the region, and millions of Indonesians and Malaysians have partial Arab heritage today. Every single Southeast Asian country aside from Thailand was taken over by a European power in the past, ranging from the British, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch, and all were invaded and essentially incorporated as puppet states of Japan as a part of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere in World War II. In a previous video, I mistakenly stated that Thailand was never invaded by Japan, but this is actually untrue, as Thailand was indeed invaded by Japanese forces in December of 1941, with the invasion and capture of Bangkok commencing and finishing in less than 5 hours, with Thailand joining the Axis powers after surrender to Japan, so they were without a doubt coerced into joining the Empire of Japan. Ironically, despite numerous war crimes and atrocities being committed by Japanese troops in Southeast Asia, nearly all Southeast Asian countries have a very positive relation and high image of the Japanese people today, with there being not only a large Japanese tourist industry in the region, but a growing Japanese retirement community as well. Now, because of the diverse histories of the Southeast Asian countries, politically they've gone in very separate directions, and here's where integration would be a bit tricky as the governments of the many countries in the region vary considerably, with Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Brunei all having monarchies, while the Philippines and Indonesia are presidential republics, Vietnam and Laos are one-party states, and Burma is still in recovery from a brutal military dictatorship. Needless to say, a full conversion to one unified form of government for all 11 Southeast Asian countries would be nearly impossible to transition within a few years or even decades. Perhaps they could adopt a federal system not too dissimilar from the United States, divided between various states or provinces with adequate political representation, and of course the logistics of such an ethnically and linguistically diverse country would be incredibly complex, but this is just a hypothetical scenario. Most likely English and another Southeast Asian lingua franca, possibly Malay, would become the national languages, while every individual area would still retain their regional languages in a system similar to India. Relations of the many Southeast Asian governments with each other and outside powers greatly varies from country to country. Cambodia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, despite the US-led intervention in the 60s, all have a very favorable view of the United States, according to most Gallup polls, while Burma, Indonesia, and Malaysia have more mixed opinions on the United States government and influence, although all currently retain healthy relations with the country. The People's Republic of China, or more generally all Chinese dynasties, have had a very ancient and nuanced relations with their southern neighbors. The Chinese are considered by many to be at odds with the US in the region, competing for influence and trade dominance with the various countries, with some countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand having a very positive view of the PRC, while those near to the juggernaut, such as the Philippines and Vietnam, have a generally more negative view, mostly due to disputes with the Spratly and Paracel Islands in the South China Sea. Relations between the many countries, although tense at times, have improved significantly in recent years, with countries like Malaysia and Singapore or Cambodia and Vietnam historically being at odds with each other in the past, however have more or less put aside their differences to further their own economic growth. In all the Southeast Asian diaspora, Southeast Asian ethnicities generally cluster around each other and other Asian immigrants, and this is especially apparent in the United States. Despite this new Southeast Asian country's relatively large land area of 4.5 million square kilometers, it would border only 4 other sovereign countries, with a 3,500 kilometer land border with China and a 1,500 kilometer land border with India, mostly boxed in by the mountainous jungle regions. Coincidentally, Southeast Asia has nearly the same population density as East Asia and around the same land area as South Asia, leading to it having an incredibly high population, yet still not as high as the population behemoths around it. As mentioned before, Southeast Asia is an incredibly diverse region ethnically speaking, having a population of nearly 650 million people, split between hundreds of separate languages and ethnicities, and we could honestly talk about them all day, although broken down into macro ethnic groups, by far the largest would be the Austronesians, such as the Javanese and Malays at around 56%, Austroasiatic groups such as the Vietnamese and Khmer at 18%, various Thai groups at 10%, Tibeto-Burman groups at 6%, and Hmong-Mien groups at 0.5%. So those of Southeast Asian descent would make up around 90.5% of the population. Almost 5% of the population are ethnically Chinese, although easily over 10% has at least some Chinese ancestry. 1.4% are South Asian, with most being of Tamil origin in Malaysia and Singapore. 1.2% are Melanesian, Papuan, or Negrito, mostly in the region of Western New Guinea and the Eastern Malay Archipelago. 1% are Eurasians, such as the Filipino mestizos of partial Spanish ancestry, or the Indo people of partial Dutch ancestry. 0.5% are descended from the Middle Eastern Arabs that first spread Islam to the maritime region, although many more than this may have partial Arab origins. 0.3% would be of unmixed European descent, either from colonial times such as the British in Singapore, French in Indochina, and the Spanish in the Philippines, or of more recent immigrant origin like the quickly growing American, Canadian, and Australian communities in Thailand and the Philippines. Now, some other major barriers to Southeast Asian unification other than diverse political systems and languages would be religion. Essentially, Southeast Asia is more religiously diverse than any other region on the planet, and that's not an exaggeration, with no one group making up over 40% of the population overall. Islam would be the largest faith at 38%, with around 95% being Sunni and only 5% being Shia, and Brunei, Indonesia, and Malaysia would be majority Muslim, with minorities in the southern regions of Thailand and the Philippines. Buddhists would be the next largest religion at 24%, around 80% Theravada and 20% Mahayana, while Buddhism is the predominant faith in all of mainland Southeast Asia, aside from peninsular Malaysia. Christianity would be the third largest religion at 22%, about 2/3 Catholic and 1/3 Protestant, with the Philippines, East Timor, and significant portions of Malaysia and Indonesia being majority Christian. Around 7.5% would be animistic, mostly in the interior of the mainland and some of the smaller villages in the maritime. 6% would be irreligious, and 1.5% would be Hindu, made up of native Hindu groups like the Balinese and more recent Indian immigrants that may have been in the region for centuries. As to the capital of such a country, Jakarta is currently the administrative center of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which makes sense seeing as to how Jakarta is by far the largest city in the region at 30 million people in the metropolitan area. However, a more centralized and international choice would probably be Singapore, which lies in the heart of the region and is a major economic hub, with Southeast Asia having a GDP of almost 8 trillion US dollars or $12,000 per capita, which varies greatly with incredibly high income regions like Singapore and Brunei to middle income like Malaysia and Thailand, or more developing economies like Burma and Cambodia. This united economy would certainly be a force to be reckoned with, being almost as large as India to the west and able to actually compete with the increasingly encroaching China to the north. But again, this whole thing is just a hypothetical thought experiment and will probably never happen in our lifetimes or at all. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on a hypothetical Southeast Asian country, what the name would be and where the capital would be, and if the Southeast Asians would ever be able to unite as a single power. A world where Vietnam, the Philippines, Burma, and Indonesia are all a part of the same country certainly does seem far-fetched, but it'd certainly be interesting to see. As always, thanks for watching everyone. This has been Mason, and I'll see you next time.